What is going on, Diablo 2 fans? Dobrunsky here. In today's video, I get to talk about my initial impressions from playing a version of the Diablo 4 beta. Though it's not really a well-kept secret that several content creators, as well as members of the Diablo community, have been invited to different iterations and phases of Diablo 4 betas, and I get to actually talk about one of those publicly now. So the beta that I'm allowed to talk about, there was a couple restrictions, so I wanted to cover that first. I'm not able to discuss any of the cutscenes or storyline. That was one restriction. The beta was also restricted to 3 characters, so the Rogue, Barbarian, and Sorceress. The Druid and Necro will be available to talk about on release. We were restricted in terms of character leveling as well. We could play infinite amount of time, but it was restricted from character level 1 to 25. And we also couldn't venture anywhere outside of the Prologue and Fractured Peaks areas. So for those that have been following Diablo 4, there is a massive expansion world and just all types of areas you can go to, but we were restricted in terms of the area. I'm not allowed to capture any of the footage. I'm only allowed to show some of the B-roll footage that was provided. So that is unfortunately some of the restrictions, but this review will be broken down into 5 components. So I do want to talk about the pros and cons, in my opinion, of the beta for testing the atmosphere, visuals, how item and progression feels. Again, this was limited due to the amount that I was able to play, so I can't really fully talk about endgame itemization when I was obviously restricted between playing character level 1 to 25. Do I want to talk about the character skill tree and customization? Again, that was a little bit limited in terms of what I was allowed to play. And also talk about the open world feel, and again, big asterisks, we were only allowed to explore a small portion of it. So that's going to basically entail everything for this review video. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Let's jump in. So in terms of the game's atmosphere, I really think that they nailed it, and I have next to no complaints. There's absolutely a stark difference, in my opinion, from this Diablo 4 beta to Diablo 3. It's much more in line, I think, with the Diablo 2/Diablo 1 feel. The color palette is a lot more muted. The gameplay is slower. Like the audio from the environmental effects and the monster combat, it just feels great. It's like dark gothic feel. There's really zero complaints that I have. I think in terms of the atmosphere, they absolutely nailed it. So moving on to visuals, this is also including gameplay and cinematics. I think that the game looks phenomenal. In terms of monster combat and animations, it's not really over the top. A good comparison, I think, would be Diablo 2 being somewhat on the restricted end in terms of spell animations early on, compared to Path of Exile, which is really the opposite end of the spectrum with a lot going on. Diablo 4, I think, finds a good balance, so less than Diablo 3, a little bit more than Diablo 2. It's not over the top. Again, that's largely sort of personal preference. But one thing that I definitely did notice is the pace of the combat, at least early on, and the skill animations are very slower paced and much more in tune with Diablo 2. So again, if that was something that turned you off from PoE or Diablo 3, I think that you might actually enjoy the slower based combat. The in-game cinematics look phenomenal. I can't really talk about anything revolved around the story of them, but when has Blizzard really released a game that has had poor cinematics? I mean, they just look great, really just on par with Diablo 2 Resurrected or even a little bit better. But as far as gameplay goes, you could definitely notice a distinct difference between playing a caster character like the Sorceress, the Barbarian with physical hack and slash combat, and the Rogue that's sort of a hybrid ranged melee character. You can absolutely feel a difference. One thing for sure is that the Barbarian does in general have like sources of AoE, so something that Diablo 2 melee characters don't really have that has been addressed. One major con though that I have noticed, again, this is an early experience so far, so I don't really want to blanket paint all of the Diablo 4 boss encounters like what we experienced in the early Diablo 4 beta, but they feel like they're just attack sponges, at least currently. Nothing really too crazy or dynamic in terms of the boss fight. You kind of sit there, swinging away and then sort of dodging an animation and then going back to repeating it. Not really super exciting, at least in my opinion. So I definitely would like to see a little bit more desired in that department. Again, big asterisks, the world boss events and the later campaign events weren't included in this beta, so that may change, but at least early on, I definitely personally felt that sort of impression. The boss battles were a little bit lacking in my opinion. So I'd like to move on to character progression and itemization. Again, big asterisks here. This beta was restricted to character level 25. So you're about character level 50 once you finish the campaign, and then you can progress all the way to 100 once you've worked your way through the different world tiers and your Paragon board. So this is obviously a very limited and narrow scope, but I don't feel like it was that horrible. The drop rates seemed sort of similar in tune to Diablo 2, so I wasn't dropping a ton of legendary items. Like, you would get a couple magic items, couple rare items, and then the odd legendary here or there. It wasn't just legendary dropping from the sky, so again, that is pretty good. But in terms of drop rates, I did have the opportunity to ask Joe Shelley specifically on his philosophy for, or at least the Diablo 4 team's philosophy in terms of drop rates. And he said, kind of paraphrasing here, that the general philosophy was wanting players to be able to make cool and fun builds relatively quickly to experience interesting and different dynamic options while still having long-term chase goals to continue to progress that character. So this is definitely a stark difference from Diablo 2, and some people may like this, some people may be against it, but Diablo 2, for example, if you really want to excel with a sorceress with a lightning or fire-based build, even with the introduction of Thunder Charms, you're pretty much restricted to having to make Infinity and then eventually expensive runewords like Flickering Flame and Phoenix to actually make that build viable. Whereas the Diablo 4 approach, they want you to be able to play a Lightning, Cold, or Fire Sorceress and progress through the game with any of those builds, but then again, having long-term chase items, so similar to getting like a Fire Skiller with 45 to life and a Torch and an Annie, and then Maras and just those high-end, Griffins, Facets, etc. in Diablo 2. They want to have those chase items in Diablo 4, but at least you have the opportunity to experience that character early on, and you're not forced to play something else until you've played X amount of hours or have dropped X item, if that makes sense. Now, in terms of trading, this is definitely a big discussion for the Diablo 2 community, at least, that really just hates this aspect of Diablo 4. There is a form of restricted trading, but it's a work in progress. They're not really set on anything specifically yet, but there is some restrictions in terms of power level for items, for example, that you can and cannot trade. So currently you can trade magic and rare items, but you can't trade legendary or ancestral legendary items or unique items. But you can, however, extract a legendary affix and trade that, or you can upgrade a rare item to a legendary item. So you can also trade crafting materials as well. So it's not necessarily entirely restricted, like a lot of people have insinuated that the game has zero trading. That's not the case, but there will be some form of restricted trading, so it's not kind of completely unlimited free market like Path of Exile or Diablo 2, but it's definitely not the other polar extreme of Diablo 3. And again, that's a work in progress. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of that, but it doesn't mean that if you drop a crazy wicked legendary item and it's maybe not for your character that you're just stuck with it sitting in your stash. You can extract that legendary affix and trade it later. So it's kind of a compromise between both of them. Like, in an ideal world, I would like free, completely unrestricted trading, but it looks like there will be some balance between the two. So that could be a pro or con for some players. It's a little bit more of a con for me than it is a pro, but it's not a game breaker for me. So moving on to the skill tree and character customization, again, a big asterisk here, only being able to play up to character level 25 doesn't really give you a full scope of the entire picture, but at least up to character level 25, it is relatively easy to respec. So if you're playing Cold Sorceress and you want to go Lightning or Fire, it just costs a little bit of gold. It's not a big deal. You can do it really whenever you want to, which I think this is a good thing early on. I don't think you want to be so restricted that if you're playing for like an hour or 2 hours and you decide you don't like Cold, that you need to, again, start over again to play Fire or Lightning. But I do know, and I do want to acknowledge that a big con for a lot of people was, to quote Rod Ferguson loosely, once you reach the endgame content, it's easier to start a new character than it is to respec that existing character. I think that this is actually a good thing, because I feel like for any successful ARPG, you kind of want to have meaningful decisions, at least when it comes to the late endgame, so you're not restricted early on. But if you can just go Whirlwind to Leap Slam to just using like figurative skills here to Meteor Sorceress to Frozen Orb without any repercussions, it doesn't really mean that your choices to work your way through a skill tree are meaningful. So I think that you want to at least find a balance between both. I know it's a con for some people, wanted to at least acknowledge that, but for me personally, it isn't. Now, in terms of character customization, it's pretty cool. You can pretty much change everything from tattoos to eye color to hairstyle, gender, whatever you want to, you can customize. But to be fair, you can't really notice those customizations. At least I don't think you can in game, unless like maybe you're sitting in town and you zoom in on your character. So that might be a con for some people. And I definitely know that the paid MTX option is a con for a lot of players, but definitely it's fair to say that some of the cooler cosmetics will be behind paid to win options. That's just going to be there, so that is definitely a con for some people. Doesn't really matter for me, but I just wanted to at least acknowledge it. So finally, I want to wrap everything up by talking about the open world feel so far. Again, big asterisks here. We were limited to the prologue area and Fractured Peak, so we couldn't explore everything, but you essentially have your main quest line that you can follow, and then side quests, and then random events that you will encounter. There are different kind of stages of how big these world events are that you just randomly encounter. Like some of the smaller ones would be more frequently. Again, the bigger ones less frequently, but there's sort of like a mix and play there. But overall, I think that it is an interesting experience versus an instant gameplay experience of Diablo 2. Some people may or may not like it. I'm kind of on the fence. I haven't really fully experienced, again, like the endgame content and the world boss events, but for those that maybe like that kind of WoW aspect, you'll probably be a fan. But that basically, guys, wraps up my overall initial impressions for this small early access beta that I was allowed to actually talk about. Again, let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree, disagree, you think I missed anything. I will follow up this video with a very interesting video tomorrow that's me asking one-on-one questions with the devs to hopefully clarify a lot of existing misinformation or questions that you may have about Diablo 4. So look forward to that video. Again, it'll be posting tomorrow. Other than that, thank you so much for the support. If you enjoyed this video, if you could throw a like on it, that'd be awesome. And I'll catch you guys on my next video or live stream. Peace out.
To the